Okay, so in section 1, which is what we're going to look at in this video, we're going to read and write decimals in numerical and word form and round decimals to a specific place value. First, let's talk about decimal numbers or decimals. Okay, so decimals are amounts that are less than a whole number or less than 1. So let's think about the decimal 0.44. It is a decimal number, okay, because 0.44 is less than 1. A decimal point is the dot written in a decimal number to indicate where the place values change from whole numbers to decimals. So the dot up here, everything after the decimal or to the right of the decimal is the decimal part of the number, and everything to the left of the decimal are your whole numbers. And mixed decimals are decimals, like I said, that are written with whole numbers and with a decimal. So here we have 2, that's your whole number, and the 0.44 is the decimal. So this is called a mixed decimal. Just like you have a mixed fraction. For example, 2 is the whole number and 3/4 is the fraction. So that's why you have mixed decimals and what we call mixed fractions. But in this section, we're only looking at decimals. Okay, so this is a very important slide, and you definitely want to either copy this down or print this slide off just so you have it to look at, and you really want to learn these place values. The tenths comes right after the decimal, okay, the hundredths, and then the thousandths. And then you have the next group, which is your thousandths, okay? You have your thousandths, 10 thousandths, 100 thousandths. And then your next group is your millionths, 10 millionths, and 100 millionths. So the further you go right, the smaller the numbers are going to get. Okay, so let's look at how to read and write a decimal. Step 1, you're going to read or write the decimal part as if it were a whole number, okay? And then name the place value of the last digit on the right. The word "and" is going to be represented as the decimal point. So these two things are the same thing. If you're reading it, you're going to read the decimal point as an "and." Okay, if you're writing the number, the "and" represents the decimal point. So make sure you understand that very important piece of information. Okay, so if we were to read this decimal point, you would look at the number, and if it was a whole number, you would just say 67, and then look at the place value to the furthest right. Okay, so that would be hundredths, because 6 is in the tenths place, next is the hundredths. So this is 67 hundredths, all right? And remember, you need your hyphen. All right, the next number, you would read that as 43. So that is why you write 43. Then you got to count the decimal places here, or call them off. You've got the tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10 thousandths, 100 thousandths. So that's what you're going to put at the end. Okay. All right, now let's look at this one. First, let's write the whole number. The whole number is 18. Then we're going to write the decimal point as and then we need to write 376. So here is 376 with your hyphen. Now let's count the place value of that. Tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So that is how we got thousandths. Okay, now let's look at the steps to round decimals to a specified place value. Determine the place to which the number is to be rounded. So you really have to know your place values here, or you're not going to be able to round it. Now, if the digit to the right of the one being rounded is 5 or more, you're going to round that number up, okay, up by 1. If the number being rounded to is 4 or less, you're going to keep that digit the same. And all digits to the right of the digit being rounded for a decimal can be deleted. Okay, remember whole numbers, everything behind it became a 0. Well, with decimals, let me just show you 0.2. All right, 0.2, let's say 0.25. Let's say we want to round that. This would round up to 0.3. All right. Now, 0.3 is your answer because you don't have to write a 0 for that number, okay? Because 0.3 and 0.30 and 0.300, these are all the same. So instead of just writing the zeros behind it, you just delete them. All right, let's look at some examples. All right, so in these examples, they have underlined the place they're wanting you to round to, but let's say that it said round to the hundredths. Okay, you would have to know where the hundredths is, so it may not be underlined for you. All right, so what we need to do is look behind the 9. All right, if you look behind the 9, what's behind it? Well, it's the number 4. So since this number is 4, we're not going to round that 9. It's going to stay the same. Now, what happens to the 4? It becomes a 0, and we don't have to write the 0 at the end of the decimal. All right, now the next one. Let's review what place value this is. Tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So let's pretend that they didn't tell you. Let's pretend they didn't underline that for you. And let's say they said round to the thousandths. You would have to come over here and say tenths, hundredths, thousandths. And you would have to underline that. Look behind the 6. All right? It's an 8. Remember, if the value that you're rounding, if the number behind it is 5 or more, the number that you're rounding rounds up 1 unit. So the 6 becomes a 7. And everything behind the 7 becomes a 0. Okay? But we don't have to write it. So our number is 137 thousandths. All right, the next one, let's pretend they didn't underline it for you and they said round to the tenths. All right, well, the tenths is always immediately right up to the immediate right of the decimal. Look behind it, it's 7, which is 5 or more, so the 3 rounds up to a 4. Everything behind it gets deleted. Okay, what about in front of it? You don't change anything in front of what you're rounding. You bring that down. So we brought the 3 down, we brought the 5 down, and we brought the 5 down, and then the 3 rounded up to a 4. All right, here, tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10 thousandths. So pretend they didn't tell you, they didn't underline it for you. You would go over here and say tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths. All right, so everything in front of what you're rounding to is brought down. Now, look behind the 8, and it's 5 or more, so the 8 becomes a 9, and then that becomes a 0 or gets deleted. Okay, so that is section 1. Let me know if you have any questions.